Hi, this is Craig Hannon with the Connecticut DTO. It's currently October 25th, 2021. 2 days ago, I gave a talk on right view to the group of DTO fellow Sangha members, and it went really well, but there were a couple of snafus which made me, prompted me to want to do it one more time just without those snafus. Notably, I was humorous at the time because right view in a lot of ways is not being bound by views of right or wrong and just being in the moment. So it was almost as if these obstacles that were thrown at me by myself were testing that. So I did okay, but I wanted to do it without those particular things arising. So to start off, I would like to offer a gatha. The Dharma, incomparably profound and minutely subtle, is rarely encountered, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of ages. Now that we see this, hear this, receive this, and maintain this, may we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. I have one other gatha I would like to offer. The one who bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature empty. Therefore, the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. I'm going to share my screen with you. So, what I hope to convey in this talk is kind of summarized in this graphic here. You probably recognize it as a reference to the movie The Matrix, a trilogy, soon to be 4-part series on people, a dystopian future situation where people are living in a fantasy or fantasy world computer simulation for some reason, but anyway, they have this reality which is artificial, and that's their lives, how they experience it. Neo, the main character, is given the opportunity to awake from that or to learn the truth of reality, and he's given a choice of doing that or not. The red pill here, if he takes that, he learns, he stays awake. Blue, he goes back to sleep. So this is really very much what our choice is. We have the choice of stepping forward and saying, this is reality, and looking at why we didn't recognize it before so that we know how to not be lured back to that, how to stay awake. And that's what right view is. So who am I to give this talk? I'm not sure, but I know that this is extremely important, and for me to understand it and for me to share what I know or my impression of it with others in hopes that that helps them and they in turn share with me. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them all. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. It's the Bodhisattva vows. Very moving. So I'm here, I'm wanted to do this for 2 reasons. One, I hadn't spent a lot of time actually looking at in depth at what right view actually is and some of the implications of it. So in this year for the Connecticut DTO, we're studying the Noble Eightfold Path, and we had monthly slots where we were focusing on one element of the path. After we opened it up to volunteers for them, right view is still open, so I took it because it is fundamental, and I didn't know a lot about it. I have a quote. One is by Joseph Jorbet, to teach is to learn twice, and another is by Jim, one of my college professors, who said to learn something well, teach it. So learning to be able to teach others forces you to understand more deeply. Right view is also a foundational transformation of the way we experience our existence. So it is a good thing to understand better. In the live version, I did request people to listen carefully. We wanted to do what we were calling an echo, so kind of allowing me after the talk to hear what people heard of the Dharma subject. And then we were just going to talk about the Dharma, the contents, right view itself, as opposed to the pedagogical methods used in this talk. It actually wound up in being a little bit different, that the two things are not really separable, so I think it turned out better, but regardless, giving my request of about that doesn't have a lot of point in a recorded session. So moving on. Starting off, I would just like to give kind of an orientation to where right view fits in. So the Four Noble Truths, the first teaching of the Buddha. And in the Mahayana tradition, they show how we should live, how we can live in the everyday world. Interestingly, they can be viewed as four nouns: the truth, the cause, the end, and the path, the truth of suffering, origin of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And that points to the Noble Eightfold Path, which kind of recursively points back to the Four Noble Truths, in that the simple definition of right view is to have a correct understanding of the Four Noble Truths. The Eightfold Path, then, is one of the elements of, right view is one of the elements of the Noble Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths could be considered four nouns. The Noble Eightfold Path could be considered four verbs. They're all things that you do to bring about an end of suffering. The Pali term, all of them are sama something. So in the case of right view, sama ditthi. Sama, commonly thought of as properly, rightly, or thoroughly, also means to go along with, or to unite, or to go together with. This fits with the idea that these elements all interbe to form a whole, and the path implies movement between them. They're all things that we continually do and work, and they all work together to form a way of living. It's so path is, you think you start here and you end up, you graduate from that and go on to the next. It's not like that. It's you're doing everything kind of as a dance all together. So they feed on each other, and maybe you might be doing more of an academic focus on one thing. You're going to do this, but you're going to come back to it, and come back to it, and come back to it, and you'll have different levels of understanding at all of those times. So it is a dynamic path. The order of things in the grouping is interesting. Well, it is interesting that there are groups. So there's the moral group, the meditation group, the wisdom group. Moral group, living harmoniously with others, kind of where the rubber hits the road in your interactions with other things and other people. The meditation group is to train the mind to develop clarity and insight into the nature of reality. And then the wisdom group is understanding why this path should be followed, and realizing wisdom is the culmination of the path. When you view them as these three divisions of moral, meditation, and insight, generally virtuous living is first, and then through samadhi we achieve culminating insight. Just because from a practical point of view, living is what you're doing. So how to live correctly is kind of the first thing that you should focus on. But when viewed more more discreetly, I guess, they choose to have the right view as kind of the foundational thing. So view is primary because it is needed to understand why the path should be followed. A question that arises, well, actually I'm skipping ahead, the origin of views. So views, Mikaditti is a regular view, or actually kind of a wrong view. Samaditi is, as we said, the whole view, the united view, the proper view. Ditti itself means view, and more often than not, unless it's preceded by Samaditi, means Mikaditti. It means generally that this is not a good thing, because more often than not, almost always, well, I guess more often than not is the more accurate, views have a life of their own, and they tend to assert themselves and lay claim to this, idea of a self existing. So that's why, unless you have samaditi, you have to have samaditi. Be very careful of views because they can trap you. So in the Yogacara school, they posit the obvious observation that we are all our perceptions. Everything we know about the world happens in our mind. Over time, the experience of our perceptions creates mental formations which coalesce into views. And then we can easily mistake these views for something more than they are and become bound by them. So this is true, and you could say, well, I'm going to avoid views completely. You can't, because views are how we function in the world. We have limited cognitive capacity. We can focus on one thing, and then we kind of understand this, and we can form a view, or later perhaps a rule on, or a view on how we deal with that. And if you didn't do that, you would be overwhelmed by everything that's going on around you. So it's necessary to do. The trick is to know what it is and to not let it take this third step, which is to mistake the views for something more than they are and become bound by them. And that's what right view does. So a little bit more on the need for right view. Joseph Goldstein, in one of his podcasts, had a really good metaphor that he used, which is basically, if we are on a journey and we're going the right direction and we keep on going, no matter how long and difficult the journey is, we will get there. But if we don't have the right direction, even with the strongest aspiration and the greatest efforts, we may be wandering all of our life. Right view provides you the right direction. It's fundamental to all aspects of our paths. This slide reflects a turmoil that I'd gone through in the past after questioning a lot of things, realizing that what I thought was the case is not necessarily the case. The bottom kind of dropped out on where I was or how I viewed things. And this happened repeatedly over the years, where you think the world is this way, and then you realize that that is not the case. So I would feel like I was running up a waterfall, or in the case of this salmon, trying to swim up a waterfall, that you struggle, and you think you're someplace, but there's nothing underneath you. So the right, the Diamond Sutra's advice is abiding nowhere, give rise to mind. So abiding nowhere, depending or clinging to nothing, let the mind arise. So it is there's a story of person jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. So the bad news is you just jumped out of an airplane with no parachute. So that's the the realization that there's no ground. The good news, the realization that well, never mind my analogy. Stop. All right, so the need for right view. So Joseph Goldstein in a podcast had a story that I think easily illustrates the need for right view. If we are on a journey and we're going in the right direction and we keep on going, no matter how long and arduous the journey is, we will get to our destination. On the other hand, if we don't have the right direction, even with the strongest aspiration and the greatest efforts, we may be wandering all of our lives. This is why right view is important. It's foundational, fundamental to all aspects of our path. Another element of why we need right view, at least for me, is over the years, I've had a view of how the world worked, or at least, yes, the idiom would be something to stand on. And then something would happen and I would realize that my reasoning was faulty, that there was something I didn't know, and it would fall away and I would be left not standing on anything, and then rebuild, standing on something else. And then again, it would fall away. So this is standing on views, abiding in views. The Diamond Sutra said, abiding nowhere, give rise to mind. So abiding, not clinging to views, is difficult to do. It is in our nature to want to invest in understanding something, and once we have that understanding, that's the way the world works, and we're stuck. We hold on to that because we found the truth. We don't need to do it anymore or search anymore. Unfortunately, that's actually where the work begins, not where it ends. So we need views, as we've discussed, because it's the way we function, but abiding in views isn't something that works. So this graphic here is me trying to abide in views and having them swept away. So what do? Well, you pay attention to right view. The next thing I wanted to address is the question of why right view isn't obvious. If this is the ideal state, why don't I intuitively know this, and why is it so difficult to achieve? And the answer is that the deck is stacked against us. We are descended from 3.7 billion years of natural selection that's gone on, where the primary measure of success was whether or not we had children, whether or not you lived long enough to pass on your genes. Suffering was not particularly relevant to this metric, or to this method of calculating. So there you have it. All of our ancestors successfully bred, and their being happy or not is irrelevant, at least in that regard. Robert Wright is one of the hats as an author, and one of the hats he also wears is of an evolutionary psychologist. This, Why Buddhism is True, is a book several of us in the DTO read a while ago, and actually went to hear him speak about it. But it is a very helpful way of looking at things. So, interestingly, it is really easy for us to see this in other animals. We can see their behavior and explain it away because of this, and tend to think of ourselves as above all of that, but we ignore the fact that we are almost completely governed by subconscious thoughts, and on our best days we retroactively fit explanations to them. There are a number of studies on this that are really fascinating. Some of the early ones, split brain personalities, where they could present a odd situation to one half of the person's mind, and the other half would come up with a perfectly reasonable explanation for why this was the case. Delusional completely, but normally you don't see it quite as easily. More recent studies with functional MRI techniques, they can see where an emotional response is formulating in someone's mind well before they've actually said anything, so they come up with the idea, and then they need to have a rational explanation for it. So that comes afterwards, and it's in some of these studies it's quite clear that that's what is occurring. So speaking of these things welling up inside of us, it's very similar to Mara. I think it is Mara. So the Buddha, on the eve of his enlightenment, was visited by Mara, who threw everything she had at the Buddha, or the future Buddha, trying to lead them off of the path that they were on. And they were unsuccessful. But Mara visits us all the time. There was a poem that I read a while ago, discovered a long time ago, Alexander Pope, an 18th century poet, that describes this, I think, quite well, where there are just a wealth of personalities living within us that are roiling and fighting each other for dominance in our attention. All of these things have had a purpose in the past, but they may not have a purpose now. They might not be the best choice. That poem is this: Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man, placed on this isthmus of a middle state, a being darkly wise and rudely great, with too much knowledge for the skeptic's side, and too much weakness for the stoic's pride. He hangs between, in doubt to act or rest, in doubt to deem himself a god or beast, in doubt his mind or body to prefer, born but to die and reasoning but to err, alike in ignorance his reason such, whether he thinks too little or too much, chaos of thought and passion all confused, still by himself abused or disabused, created half to rise and half to fall, great Lord of all things, yet a prey to all, sole judge of truth, in endless error hurled, the glory jest and riddle of the world. The last thing I wanted to say about why this isn't obvious. There is a passage from a book that I didn't read, but was pointed to by someone else. The story in the book is it's a Buddhist private investigator, I believe, and he's giving an assessment of people. You see, dear reader, speaking frankly without any intention to offend, you are a ramshackle collection of coincidences, held together by a desperate and irrational clinging. There is no center at all. Everything depends on everything else. Your body depends on the environment. Your thoughts depend on whatever junk floats in from the media. Your emotions are largely from the reptilian end of your DNA. Your intellect is a chemical computer that can't add up a zillionth as fast as a pocket calculator. And even your best side is a superficial piece of social programming that will fall apart just as soon as your spouse leaves with a kid and the money in your joint account, or the economy starts to fail and they get the sack, or you get conscripted into some idiot's war, or they give you the news about your brain tumor. To name this amorphous morass of self-pity, vanity, and despair, self is not only the height of hubris, it is also proof, if any were needed, that we are above all a delusional species. that cheery note. That's why we need right view, and that's why it's difficult to find. So then we're left with the question, okay, I'm convinced that this is a valuable thing, but actually what is it that you're talking about? A right view is not a view, it is a meta view of views. Meta being above as opposed to METTA, so at a higher level of abstraction. It's a view that leads to wholesome results, and most importantly, it is pragmatically determined. So what you see as leading to these wholesome results is what you follow. It is, the path unfolds before you and you can see the path. Right view is not moralistic or dogmatic, but it's simply what leads to the end of suffering. An underlying right view is the admonition to always inquire why we think what we think. Examine our views. It isn't a guiding theory, but it's a transformation of perception resulting from living the Dharma. One comes to see things in a manner by which we don't become attached. Samadhi is perfected vision. So that's right view, but what is right viewing? What is the actual act? Everything that you encounter is your life. This is it right now, right here. You experience your personal mind and its activity, but you experience it with universal awareness. So to answer the Diamond Sutra's abiding nowhere admonition, you abide in the meta viewpoint of right view. It has you take your Buddhist vows and understanding as the ground on which you stand. It's using those ideas and dancing with the present moment as it is. Grasping at nothing, including enlightenment, nor merge with oneness, nor alternate between the two. Instead, experience the attempts of grasping while being intimate with the Absolute. Suzuki Roshi said in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, the self is the door that swings open and closed with each breath. The breath is not yours, it is the universe's breath. One thing that I came across in my reading was a practice that is done which helps you maintain right view. So when something happens and you can feel a response arising, stop for a minute and say, what is this? What just happened? What's next? So what is it? What is this feeling? What am I feeling right now? Without attaching anything to it, just see what it is you're feeling. Then look for the causes, the antecedents of this. What led to this? What triggered it? And this is not a deep psychological look at way back when this happened, and so now I'm predisposed to this or whatever. That type of analysis is certainly valuable, and to not do that when it's needed is spiritual bypassing, which is something that is definitely to be avoided. But in this case, just what were the triggers? This is the pragmatic portion. What are the triggers? Know them so that you can be aware of things when red flags can go up for you and you can see stuff coming. Then the last thing, what's next? Grounded in right view, formulate an appropriate response. So that's a little glimpse at what right viewing is. Another thing I wanted to address is, what do the sutras say? So there are a number of sutras that talk about right view, and I just wanted to pay a little homage to them. So one is the Kakayana Gata Sutta. Kakayana Gata Sutta. So Buddha is being addressed by a person saying to what extent is the right view. So as you can see, people normally see a polarity of existence and non-existence. They are bound, but they should not be bound to attachments on those things. Get used to paradox and contradiction, ambiguity, because everything exists and everything doesn't exist is not really a valid question. There is a non-dual response, and our charge is to navigate that. Then the last thing is the looking at things from the 12 links of interdependent co-arising, which are these, starting with ignorance, and from that mental formations can occur, and from that consciousness may arise. Mind and body, the skandhas, going on to the 6 senses where you have actual contact with the world. The response to that, and then craving, grasping, becoming, birth, aging, and death. Another sutra that talks about right view is the Right View Sutra, Samaditi Sutta. So, right view is normally explained in terms of the Four Noble Truths, but in this course, Shariputra expands it in a couple of different directions. So he looks at these two concepts, skillful actions and unskillful actions, and then the idea of nutriments, what you feed yourself. And this goes to the Abhidharmic psychology of seed formations in the alaya consciousness and how the manas interact with them and bring them up. Basically, feed the good stuff and don't feed the not good stuff. You are what you think. Additionally, the sutta goes on to talk more about the dependent co-arising. So this was kind of interesting where he's going backwards to the beginning. And first of all, I mean, the first point here is that you don't have to look at all 12 things and necessarily fit yourself into your experience into them. You can look at any one pair of steps, and you can see there is ample opportunity for discernment of why you want to stop this, where the unskillfulness arises in all of this. So in this case, he's going backwards, going back to origination of ignorance, and finds the origination of ignorance to be mental fermentation. And I'm pretty sure that that is mental fermentation is the same thing as the taints. So it's one of the difficulties I have with Buddhism is there are a lot of different words that sometimes mean the same thing, different traditions. These fermentations, the origins of the impetus of ignorance, actually depend on ignorance. And as such, they can be reduced or diminished by reducing ignorance. The Nibbedika Sutta says that there are 3 kinds of fermentations: fermentation of sensuality, becoming, and the fermentation of ignorance. So, again, as I said before, ignorance is a fermentation as well as the cause by which fermentations come into play. So then getting back to, stuff that's perhaps contained in the suttas also, but I found it in a number of writings by people a lot more familiar with Buddhism than me. The guidelines, I mean, how do you practice right view? There are some guidelines. The 3 Dharma seals, I think that graphic is actually very funny. are things that they're seals. They're not real seals. They're characteristics that are in everything. Impermanence. Everything is dynamic. Everything is in flux, and that's good, bad. It is what it is, and that's what allows transformation to be possible. Ironically, nothing is constant except for change. The second seal is non-self. So self is a useful construct, but it is not a real thing. It is just a useful construct. The combination of impermanence and non-self shows us that everything is in the one thing, and that the one thing is in everything. When we touch these truths deeply, we touch the ground that's beyond the dichotomies of birth and death, permanence and impermanence, and non-self. The last of the three seals is Nirvana. So, the complete silencing of all concepts. This silencing of concepts also includes the eight concepts of birth, death, permanence, dissolution, coming, going, one and many. And it also includes the silencing of their opposites. Nirvana is not something to find later. As a Dharma seal, it's present in all the teachings and in all that we experience. The Dharma seals may be more familiar to you with Nirvana being shown as dukkha instead. Maybe in other traditions also, but in the Plum Village tradition, Thich Nhat Hanh started using Nirvana instead, with the reasoning be that these fundamental characteristics are present in all things. Dukkha is not necessarily present in all things. That is a choice that we make by how we respond. So it is not a fundamental characteristic, but Nirvana is available in all things. And so he uses that instead. A much more positive way of looking at it. The next set of guidelines are known as the three doors of liberation, or also known as the three concentrations. So the wave resting in the water, she's capable of touching the ocean in herself. The three doors of liberation remind us that we are no different than the wave, empty, signless, and able to touch the ultimate, inherent in all of us at any moment. So these three concentrations, or doors of liberation: emptiness, sunyata. So the idea of self should be de-emphasized because it is simply a construct. This is because that is. The next is signlessness. So a sign is a perception. Diamond Sutra says wherever there's a sign, there is deception, illusion. It also says that if you see the signlessness of signs, you see the Tathagata. The Tao Te Ching alludes to signlessness in chapter 1, where they say the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. The last of the three concentrations is aimlessness. There is nothing to attain. Aimlessness is stopping and realizing the happiness that is already available. This concludes my talk. Right view to dance gracefully between the principle and the persona. Thank you.